Now, Sean Corcoran is the CEO of Men for Life, a national nonprofit dedicated to forming men in biblical masculinity and equipping them to protect life, support mothers, and strengthen families. A pro-life speaker, writer, and podcast host, Sean shares a powerful personal testimony of abortion loss, addiction, and recovery, and the healing that led him back to the Catholic faith and to his vocation as a husband, father, and an advocate for life. After a successful law career, Sean discerned a call to serve full-time in pro-life ministry. Today, he leads Men for Life's national initiatives, including a groundbreaking fatherhood curriculum for pregnancy centers, an online community called the Men for Life Arena, and the Men for Life podcast, where he interviews leaders, scholars, and men and women whose lives have been shaped by abortion and redemption. His forthcoming book explores how reclaiming authentic Christian masculinity is essential to rebuilding a culture of life. Sean is a husband and a father of 5, 2 biological and 3 adopted, and speaks across the country on fatherhood, masculinity, and the indispensable role of men in the pro-life movement. Let's give our brother and friend a warm welcome.
I don't know if it's working. Is it working?
Yes.
Oh, great. Okay, thanks. She said take all the time I want. So I'm going to use the long version. So Irene mentioned that I'm Catholic, and I like to tell people that many times when I get asked to speak for pregnancy centers, the first question they ask me is, how Catholic are you? Because here we are in a cowboy church, right? And like not everybody that goes and supports pregnancy centers are Catholic, and and they want to make sure that I'm able to speak. And so what I tell them is, I did a banquet in Texas last year, and when I finished, a Baptist preacher came up and asked me to do their men's conference. So I feel like I'm qualified to be here, and I'm really excited. This is the coolest church I've ever been in. Since I'm in a cowboy church, I'm going to start with something that I usually talk about in the middle. I don't know if any of you guys are familiar with a guy named Cowboy Dwayne. His name is actually Dwayne Noel. He's got a YouTube channel. He is a rancher, and he teaches men about masculinity through cowboying. Well, Cowboy Dwayne, I saw this awesome podcast with him, and he said, this country is only as good as the churches in this country. The churches are only as good as the families that make up those churches. Those families are only as good as the marriages that those families are built upon, and those marriages are only as good and as strong as the men that God built those marriages on. So as goes the man, so goes the marriage. As goes the marriage, so goes the family. As goes the family, so goes the churches. And as goes the churches, so goes the country. Everything is built upon the husbands and the fathers, and this country is a failure today because husbands and fathers have failed. Now, whether or not you believe this country is a failure today, I think that we can agree that this country is failing today when it comes to abortion. Okay? And it's interesting when we talk about the churches are built upon, the country is built upon the churches are built upon the man. Men become the leaders that have to guide the churches. But I think that we also need to realize that the churches guide the men. It goes both ways. And so the problem is, I talked to Irene last night, and she said, no church promoted this. She had the idea to bring 300 men here. We have a lot of great men here. I have never been in an event where we had this many men speak. I think we should probably give them all another round of applause, because that is the hardest thing for people to do. But the idea was to get 300 men here, like Gideon out of the Bible. There's 300. God called him down to 300. And those 300, through the power of God, led the charge so that he could then call everyone else to fight that battle. And so this is the beginning, like Irene said. We are here tonight in the beginning of what is greatness to come when we're calling men into the pro-life movement. And I have never been as excited about an event as I was about tonight and that I am about tonight, because that is amazing. When you call men together and you call men to lead, we can change the world. And that's what Men for Life is built upon. And the problem with the churches when it comes to not wanting to talk about this, and it is a problem, and I think we should talk about it because you guys are going to go back to your own churches, and I invite you to share this with the pastors, and if you don't want to share it, I invite you to give them my number, and I will share it. But the three objections that people usually have, that the pastors usually have, and this is across the board, this is not just a non-denominational thing, this is not just a Protestant thing, this is a Catholic thing, this is across the board when it comes to Christian churches. There is an objection among the churches to talking about abortion. And they have three main objections, and those are, number one, politics. I'm going to steal something from Charlie Kirk because he said it way better than I could ever say it, but he reminds us of Jeremiah 29:7. Seek the welfare of your city. In its welfare, you will find your welfare. We are called to get involved in politics because politics involves us. And the problem with not talking about politics from the altar is that allows Satan to take any issue, every issue, and silence you on it. When pastors refuse to talk about political issues, they are literally giving the enemy the tool to silence the church. And that's not what they are called to do. The second objection that they give is, well, we're going to lose people. And they can only mean two things. Either they're going to lose worshipers or they're going to lose donors, right? As to the worshipers, we have to be reminded that when Jesus fed the 5,000, after that he said, unless you eat my body and drink my blood, unless you eat my flesh and drink my blood, you will not have eternal life, and lost many followers. And Jesus did not follow and chase them down and try to get them back and try to say, wait guys, let me tone my message down, right? So what message are these pastors preaching if they are scared to lose people by preaching the truth? And as to the donors, I have to remind pastors, are you called to build a church? Like, this is the coolest church I've ever been in, and there's no floors. Like, what are we doing if we're if we're worried about losing donors because we're worried that we might not be able to, to buy enough donuts on Sunday or coffee? What is the point of your preaching? The point of the preaching better not be donors. It better be to bring people to heaven. And you cannot bring people to heaven unless you are preaching the truth. The third objection that they give is, well, we're going to offend people who have already had abortions. And I have to tell these pastors, your silence on this issue is more offensive than anything you could possibly say because they are already hurting. And all of these objections, they come from a place of fear, right? But we are called in Joshua 1:9. We are not called, we are commanded. We are commanded to be courageous because God is with us. Everyone in that church hears what is not said. The men, the leaders of their family, they hear that abortion is not an issue that they need to lead on. The young people hear all the things we're talking about, right? The church talks about a lot of things, but they're not talking about abortion, so abortion must not be that important. And they take that with them. And the people hurting from abortions hear that their sins are not forgivable and that they cannot be redeemed. This is a failure of the churches to lead. And just as the churches are called to lead, men are called to lead. But men are silent. And it was said up here a couple times tonight already, but the reason men don't talk about abortion is because men don't talk about abortion. Right? If we're not talking about it, then we think that we're alone in this. And if we think that we're alone in this, then we're not going to talk about it. And so it's this weird cycle of men just, I think I forget who said this, but they said fear thrives in silence. And I think that's a really big deal. Fear thrives in silence. And if we think that we're the only one, and when it comes to men who have lost a child to abortion, for years, most men think they are the only one. Which is why I talk about it. But the reason men are silent is because for 53 years, the abortion industry has told men to sit down, to shut up. This is not our fight. This is a women's issue. For 53 years, they have said this is about bodily autonomy. They have said that we don't have anything to do with this. We can't possibly know. No uterus, no opinion. There's no reason for us to have a voice in this fight because this is a women's issue. And while the pro-choice side was saying all these things to silence men, the pro-life side was hyper-focused on women and babies, overlooking men completely. And so we have one side telling men to sit down and shut up. The other side, over here, focused on women and babies. Nobody's looking to the men, and so the men just sat it out. And even amongst the pro-life movement, men have started to believe that this is a women's issue. I'll share with you, I did an event at Dallas Baptist University for the Students for Life on Wednesday. And the person in charge of the organization kept sending me what she thought was a great title for the event. And it was like, Men and Abortion, and then a whole bunch of words that I didn't understand about gender, changes, and not like transgender, but just like changing gender roles and all this stuff. And I kept saying, hey, I don't know that this is my message. I don't know what it is you're asking me to talk about. Can you just explain it better? And finally, I just said, call it Abortion and Masculinity. Like, that's the title. That's what I'm going to come talk about. If you want to ask me questions afterwards about whatever you're thinking, like, I will be happy to answer them the best I can. So she called it Abortion and Masculinity, and then she sent me the graphic. And it is a silhouette, like a silhouette drawing, a beautiful silhouette drawing of a pregnant woman. Okay? It is the least masculine graphic that I have ever seen in my life. And I texted her back and I said, first of all, like, whoever did this, like, this is not an insult, and I do not want you to change this because I think it's really important. It gets to the heart of this message, right? That we're talking about abortion and masculinity. Even the font was like the most feminine font you could possibly get. Because we think about this as a women's issue, right? And these are young people. These are 20-year-olds who are hungry for a message of masculinity, but can't make that connection between what is masculinity, right? Because it's been lost, especially when it comes in the abortion issue. And so men, for the most part, have kind of sat down and shut up. And the other reason men have sat down and shut up is because of all the hate and all the vitriol. You know, I will tell you, if you go look at my social media, don't even watch what I post. Just go read the comments. The comments are very entertaining. They're very hateful. Nobody likes the fact that I am a man talking about abortion and trying to stop abortion. And so what I get is, my favorite one was, how many kids have you adopted? Like, that's the question. Like, how many kids have you adopted if you're pro-life? If you're pro-life, you have to adopt all the kids. I just want you guys to know that. When you go home today, I need you to go home and apply for adoption, adopt all the kids, otherwise you're not pro-life. So obviously that's a ridiculous argument, right? Like, you do not have to you don't have to adopt all the kids to believe that abortion is an injustice. We're killing babies. Like, I can believe that it's not okay to kill babies without adopting all the kids. But I love when people ask that question because we've adopted 3. And so that's pretty much what I said was, this is a ridiculous argument. It doesn't make any sense, but I've adopted 3. To which she responded, you are a Nazi and a pedophile. Because that's how this works. The name calling, the vitriol. This week alone, I had somebody take one of my videos and twist it into something else and say I was a sexual predator because I don't like abortion. Okay? This is what happens. We are told that we just want to control women's bodies. We are told that we want to force 10-year-old rape victims to give birth. 10-year-old rape victims account for less than 0.5% of any abortion in this country, but they account for 99.5% of all of the pro-choice arguments. And when men are faced with this kind of hey, you just want to control women's bodies, you just want to force 10-year-old rape victims to give birth, you don't have a uterus, you don't have a voice, and nobody's been calling us to action, it just sometimes gets easier to go play golf, right? Like, let's just sit this one out. Let's go play fantasy football. Like, I don't want to stand on a stage and talk about abortion because there's a lot of people that don't like that, and it's just easier to go do man things and to agree with you. Like, this is not a man's issue. Nobody's telling me it is, so why not just sit this one out? And the problem with that is that silence and passivity are a failure of masculinity. Sir Edmund Burke said, the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. Silence and passivity are a failure of masculinity. And I'm going to prove it to you with the Bible. So who can agree that we are in a spiritual war? Ephesians 6:12 says that we are in a spiritual war, not a war of flesh and blood, but a war against the principalities, the authorities, and the rulers of this dark world. Ephesians 6:13 then tells us what we need to do about it, right? Put on the full armor of God. How do we start? We start with the belt of truth. Nothing else matters without the truth. The reason nothing else matters without the truth is because Satan is the father of lies. John 8:44. Now I'm just quoting scripture verses to prove to you that I'm not just a Catholic. I'm a Catholic who's learning the Bible. So then we go to Genesis. And we look at what's going on with the father of lies, right? And in Genesis 3, he's in Eve's ear, doing the one thing that makes it the easiest for him, separating the union between God and man and woman, right? Just like they do in the abortion industry, right? They want to get the men out so they can just get to the women. So he's in Eve's ear, and he's saying, you are not good enough. You are not capable enough. You are not strong enough, just the way God made you. You cannot be the woman that you were created to be unless you do the one thing that God told you not to do. Unless you eat this fruit, you cannot be the woman that you were created to be. Unless you get rid of this baby, you cannot be the woman that you were created to be. And she eats the fruit. And then in Genesis 3:6, she turns. And she gives the fruit to her husband, who is with her, who is right there, silent, passive, probably thinking, her mouth, her choice, her body, her choice. If she eats this fruit, the consequence falls on her. If she gets rid of this baby, the consequence falls on her. The burden is 100% on her. And that is not how this works. Because the silence and passivity of the first man is what led to death for all. Biblical masculinity, as we define it in Men for Life, is to protect, to provide, to lead, to serve, and to leave a legacy that honors God. In Adam's failure to protect his wife, to provide for his wife, to lead his wife, to serve his wife, he left a legacy of death. And in abortion, the silence and passivity of men is leaving a legacy of death. Abortion is the product of failed masculinity. And look, just to prove that it wasn't on Eve, and I know you guys have probably heard this before I said it, but just to prove that this didn't fall on Eve, when God came looking in the garden and he said, hey, where are you guys? He was looking for Adam. And when Adam stood out, he said, what'd you do? And he said, well, God, you gave me this woman, and she gave me the fruit. And look, I know that sounds funny because it is. But the reality is that whenever I come out and I say abortion is the product of failed masculinity, you would be shocked at the number of men who jump into the comments and say, how are you going to blame this on men? This is women's fault. How are you giving women a free pass? And I am not giving women a free pass. If you kill your baby, you do not get a free pass. However, I'm not giving men a free pass either. And that's what this is about, right? It's not about not holding women accountable. It's about holding men accountable as well. Because abortion is the product of failed masculinity, the silence and passivity of men in the face of pure evil. And it's important to remember that as Satan is the father of lies, all these things that for 53 years the pro-choice side has been saying about it being a women's issue is a lie. And abortion does affect men. Similar to some of the guys that were up here tonight, when I was 19 years old and I was away at college, my girlfriend came to my room and she said, I'm pregnant. Now, I was raised a Christian. I went to Christian school. My entire life, I knew what abortion was. I didn't know anybody that ever had one. I didn't know that it was something people did. It was 1997, for those of you who remember, for those of you who are alive. I know a couple of you weren't. For those of you who remember, 1997, the internet was a place that you went to download music very slowly, right? That was it. And then it'd get cut off, and you'd have to start all over, all right? Like, that's all the internet was. So there was no shouting your abortion. There was no TikTok videos of people, talking about how excited they were to have an abortion. There was no videos of people outside of Planned Parenthood. It was something that people did silently and in the shadows, right? In secret. And so I didn't know anybody that had had an abortion. So when she came and told me that she was pregnant, I immediately jumped to, okay. Like Brian. I was like, all right, we're going to have a baby. Like, these are the things that this is going to change. I probably wasn't quite as excited as Brian was. But I recognized the responsibility that I had, and I recognized that there was a baby coming, and this is what we need to do. And somewhere in me talking about what it is we need to do and how this is going to change my life, she stopped me and she said, well, I'm not going to have a baby, I'm going to have an abortion. And the best that I could do was to say, no, you're not going to have an abortion. Over and over and over. And it didn't matter what I said. And it was made very clear to me that it didn't matter what I said or what I felt. She was going to have an abortion. And so she did. And after she had that abortion, just like me, her grades started to suffer. She started to struggle in school. She went to a counselor. That counselor helped her to waive her classes so that she would be able to continue in her education. She came to me and she told me, the counselor helped me to waive my classes so that I could continue without having bad grades. And I hadn't gone to class at all since I found out about the abortion. So I went to that counselor the very next day. And I said, hey, this is the person you talked to yesterday. This is the situation you talked about. This is the resolution you came to. I'm the other part of that. And she said, no. You are a man. This does not affect you. So that's what I was left with, right? I was left with the mother of my child telling me that nothing that I did, nothing that I said, nothing that I felt mattered, and a counselor telling me that because I'm a man, this doesn't affect me. So I went back to my dorm room and I sat there until the semester ended and I failed out of college. I moved home and I failed out of another college 2 more times. And 8 years after the abortion, I was lying face down in the carpet of a dirty and dark hotel room, one light bulb left in the room because I had used every other light bulb to smoke meth out of. And I was at the end of a 7-year methamphetamine addiction, homeless, unemployed, and overdosing in that hotel. And by the grace of God, I made it out of that hotel room, and the next day I woke up and I made it into treatment. And in treatment, for the first time, somebody helped me to connect the dots because, just like other people have talked about tonight, I didn't make a connection at all because I was told that it didn't affect me. So all of the negativity that I was feeling and everything I was trying to cover up could not possibly have been from the abortion. It never would have occurred to me because that didn't affect me. And so I was just trying to cover up the way that I felt with anything that I could do, with drugs, with alcohol, with women, with partying, anything that I could find to do. And that counselor walked me through my life to figure out, well, how did you go from graduating high school, going to college, and then all of a sudden you ended up here, homeless, unemployed, just overdosed, and you're in a treatment center. And the only thing that had happened was the abortion. Looking at it objectively, nothing else happened. I was on an upward trajectory to a downward spiral, and that was the only thing that happened. But it had never occurred to me. And that counselor helped me to begin to heal. She helped me to be able to mourn. She gave me permission to grieve the loss of my child. She helped me to name my child. I have a son. His name is Michael. She helped me to just begin that healing process, to write letters of forgiveness, forgiving my younger self, forgiving the mother, to write letters asking for forgiveness from my child, and to really begin that healing process. And through beginning that healing process from the abortion, I was able to begin the healing process from the drugs. But the one thing she didn't tell me was that you are not the only man. You're not the only man that has dealt with this. And so in my mind, even though I was able to make the connection to all of the negativity and to begin to heal, I was the only man who had ever felt this way. And so I went off, and I did the things that people try to do whenever they get out of treatment. And I went back to college, I went to law school. I married a woman I'd been pursuing for 7 years, but whom God had been protecting from who I was while he helped to build me into who he needed me to be for her. I started a law firm, and then I went on a retreat. And on that retreat, it was a men's retreat, and men were talking about all the things that were the most vulnerable things in their lives. And these were all men that I knew and respected, business owners and people in my community. And they're talking about all these things that were really hard, and I'm listening to them, just like tonight, and I'm listening to them talk. And instead of judgment, they're getting grace. And I just felt this overwhelming feeling that, hey, I can share anything I want right now, and nobody is going to judge me. Because even though I was able to begin healing, I had tremendous guilt from the failure to protect my child. And so I shared my story. And when I shared my story, it was healing. But what's more important than that was that it wasn't about me. Because after I shared my story, I had 3 different men come up to me in private and say, I've never told anyone this. It's been 20 years, or it's been 30 years. And I lost a child to abortion when I was 19, when I was 20. And some of these men fought against it like I did, and some of these men pushed for it, forced it. And they still suffered silently, thinking they were the only one with guilt and shame and regret for decades. And at that point, I realized that it was important for me to share my story, not for me, but because it opened the door for other men to share their stories. And it's like a domino effect, right? If I share my story, and that allows another man to share his story, and to know that he's not alone, and to feel comfortable sharing his story, then that can allow another man to share his story. And it can get to the point where no longer are we saying men don't talk about abortion. And so I shared my story, and I started sharing privately, in small groups and on retreats. And I went back home, and we started our family. We had 2 biological kids. We adopted 3 more. And I was trucking along, and I had a great law firm going. And then in 2021, I looked down, and I recognized with 5 kids that I was really good at practicing law, and I was really bad at practicing law and being a good husband and being a good father. That I was always working 100% of the time, even when I was home with my kids, and all I ever wanted was to be a dad. And so I quit. And I say it like that because that's what happened, but the reality is that it was a long time coming. Like, I recognized this, and it was not an impulsive decision where I just gave up on my family. Like, I knew what was coming, and I planned it out, and I stopped in 2021, and I shut down my office in 2022. And I want to backtrack a minute, and I just want to make sure that I'm clear that, we had several men up here, and I usually don't have that opportunity to say, here are other men who are saying, hey, abortion affected me, right? But I'm not the only one, and I think that's really important, because abortion does affect men, and abortion affects men so tremendously that it affects men who even don't know that it's affecting them. I'll share with you a study out of Denmark. Now, here's what's really interesting about Denmark. Denmark is not a pro-life country. Okay? This was not a voluntary study. This is a study based on socialized medicine and data, and that's it. So these men, they studied 192,000 men who had lost a child. Of those, 221 of them had lost a child to abortion. None of these men knew that they were being studied. They just were in the system as having lost a child to abortion, and then they tracked the data, right? Of the men who had lost a child to abortion, they were up to 4.5 times more likely to seek mental health professionals, 90% more likely to require antidepressants, 79% more likely to require anti-anxiety medications, and 74% more likely to require prescription sleep aids. I needed all of them. Antidepressants, anti-anxiety medications, prescription sleep aids for years. And then we look at Support After Abortion, who did a voluntary study here in the States. And they found that 1 in 5 men will lose a child to abortion by the time they're 45. Now that number is probably much higher because of all the men who don't know, right? All the abortions that happen that men are not aware of. But what the study found was that 1 in 5 men would lose a child by the age of 45 to abortion. Of those men, the men studied, it was 49%, 51% pro-choice to pro-life, so almost 50-50. Across ideological lines, 71% of them noticed an adverse change after the abortion. And 83% of them said that they would have benefited from someone to talk to. So when I shut down my law firm in 2022, Men for Life, an organization that's been around since 2018, started asking me if I would come and run this organization. And I said, there is no way I am going to run a pro-life. I have no idea how to do that, and I do have an idea how much you're going to pay. And they kept asking. And while they were asking, I started working with a consultant on business plans. And it was about 18 months that I told Men for Life no. And it was about 8 months that I was working on these business plans. And in June of 2024, I was on an airplane on the way to meet with this consultant. And on that airplane, God very clearly said, you are going to go run this nonprofit. I hadn't talked to them in 4 months, but it wasn't a question, it was a command. He said, you are going to go do this. And so I walked into that meeting with this giant stack of papers, and I said, I am ready to do this next week. Here's everything we've been working on. But listen to what just happened. Like, I don't know if this guy's a Christian. I don't know if he's pro-life. Like, I just know that I had to tell him because he's the only person I saw after that. And so here's what just happened. And what I wanted him to say was, this is a horrible idea. Like, so I could blame him for not listening to God, right? You gave me that woman. And instead he said, Sean, this is a great idea. This is going to help you get everything that you've been telling me you want to get out of life. And I'll help you grow it for the money you've already paid me. And so I got back on the airplane and I sent an email and I said, hey guys, I don't know if you're still looking. Because I certainly didn't think they were just waiting for me, for me to say no 50 times. But I'll take the job. And they said, great. So I started in August of 2024 as the CEO of Men for Life. And I think that gets to, one of my last points, which is something that I was asked in a radio interview on Monday. She said, what would you tell a young man who, says, hey, I just found out that I lost my child to abortion, and is struggling. And I said, well, I would tell him two things. First, we have to heal. I don't know who said it before me tonight, but somebody said it, but you cannot help anyone if you are coming from a place of brokenness. Broken men cannot fully be the man that they were created to be for their spouse, for their children, for their communities. Broken men cannot lead until they begin to heal. So you have to begin that healing process. That's incredibly important. But more important than that, or just as important as that, is now what? Now what? What are you going to do about it? Because that's what's important. We can either be the victim and we can sit back and we can say, oh man, like how easy would it have been for me to be the victim and to say, well, she killed my baby, and then I ended up as a meth addict for 7 years, and then I was homeless, and how can anybody expect anything of me? But now what? Like as a man, we are called to stand up and do something, to take action. We cannot be silent. We cannot be passive. We have to take action. So the question is, now what? And when we look at this country, 54%, based on a poll in June of last year, 54% of men in this country identify as pro-life. Only 41% identify as pro-choice. We have the numbers. But where are they? You're going to tell me there's not 300 pro-life men in Skagit County? We know there are. You know them. Right? And part of the problem is that we haven't been called to action. And so I would ask each and every one of you to go out and call them to action, because there are things that they can do. And it gets better when you look at the numbers. There was an NBC poll at the end of last year that measured liberal, conservative men, women, okay? Looking just at 18 to 29-year-olds, because this is the future. Looking just at 18 to 29-year-olds, they gave them the choice of what metric would you say you would define success by? And they gave them a list of 13 things, okay? It could be your job, it could be marriage, it could be kids, it could be social media influencer was one of them. That was number 13 for all 4 groups. Okay, so liberal women, 18 to 29. Nobody wants to be a social media influencer. Or they don't want to tell anybody in a poll. I think about that often. I'm sure at least half of those people are on social media leaving nasty comments on other people's posts. But again, among the conservative men ages 18 to 29, they chose children as number 1. Children as the number 1 metric of success. Marriage was number 4. Okay? And look, it's funny, but if you look at the way that they did it, it was like, all right, I want kids, I want a family. So how do I get a family? Well, I need to have a job, stable savings. You know, it was like they were going through the list of things that were important. So it's not they don't just want to go out and just get kids. But that was the number 1 metric of success. Conservative women, that was number 6. Liberal men, it was number 10. And liberal women chose kids right above social media influencer. But what's even better is that there's another poll that shows a shift amongst 18 to 29-year-old men from the left to the right. I don't know which way I'm going here. So from being liberal to conservative. So not only do we see that there's a shift away from this idea that the kids aren't great, but there's a shift towards it, and then it becomes the number 1 important thing. And then we've got 54% of men in America identifying as pro-life. We are moving towards an amazing time. And it just comes down to, where are the men? Like, we have to get them here, because numbers mean nothing if we do nothing. And a lot of times, and you guys will see this because you're all here, so I know that you know a lot of pro-life people, but you'll see this when you go to things, you know, where are the men generally? Well, they show up to the banquets, right? They show up to the marches, the pro-life social events. Men will write the checks, and I'm going to ask you guys to write the checks tonight. Men will write the checks, but we've already agreed that we are in a spiritual war. And if we are in a spiritual war, and if we can acknowledge that 90% of the people fighting this war are women, then if we as men have consigned ourselves to sit back and write checks to fund a war that we send our women off to fight, then we are failing in our masculinity. And the next thing that we can do is we can mentor the next generation of young men. Because there's some great men here, and they all have a story. When we look at the next generation of young men, we know that fatherlessness is a problem. And when we look at the men that come into the pregnancy centers, look, you got the ultrasound going. I just want to share with you a statistic out of Vitae Foundation. 97%, I am aware of no other statistic that's higher than this. 97% of men who see an ultrasound and go through a fatherhood program choose life. 97%. But if we as men are looking at the next generation and saying, they don't have a chance, knowing that they didn't have a dad, or they had a bad dad, or they just, had no male role model, and refusing to fill that void, then again, we are failing in our own masculinity, because we are called to lead. And sometimes leading means leading the next generation of young men. And that is what Men for Life is doing. We are working on a fatherhood program that will come out this year for pregnancy centers, mentoring through principles of biblical masculinity. The pregnancy centers at the last conference, or the first conference I went to, I had 104 different pregnancy centers come up, and they asked me the exact same 3 questions. They said, do you have a fatherhood program? Because they knew, before that statistic even came out, they knew that getting the young men into a fatherhood program saved babies. But it doesn't just save babies, right? It saves the men. If you save the men, then you can save the families. And if you save the families, we already went through how far that goes. So do you have a fatherhood program? The second question was, once we get them in, how do we get them to come back? And the problem they were facing was the fatherhood programs that they had were teaching them how to change diapers on a doll for a baby that's going to be here in 25 weeks with a woman who you may or may not be in a relationship with. And you're competing against everything else they've got going on in this world. with a baby doll and diapers. So that's not going to get them back. So how do you get them to come back? Well, you got to give them something they want, right? Well, what do young men want? They want masculinity. Even if they don't know what that word is, they know that they are missing something, which is why we have men shifting from the left to the right, which is why we have conservative men saying kids are the number one thing that we want. Like, young men know that they are missing something and they want it, which is why Andrew Tate is incredibly popular, right? Because he was there when nobody else was. But Andrew Tate is selling a hedonistic, self-serving message of masculinity. And so then the question becomes, what do we want to serve? We don't want to serve them the lie. We want to serve them the truth. And so our fatherhood program is built upon principles of biblical masculinity, to protect, to provide, to lead, to serve, to live for something greater than yourself, and to live for people other than yourself. To teach them how to be a man, then to teach them how to be a co-parent, then to teach them how to be a father, then to get them out of the community they're in and immerse them in a community of good men. And the third question that they asked was, how do we get men in our community to mentor these programs? And that's where that call to action comes from, that we cannot just sit around and complain about the young men not knowing how to be men if we're not going to help them to learn. Because God calls us not only to give our treasures, right? He calls us to give our time, our talent, and our treasures. It's not an either or. And so that'd be my call to action to each of you in here today, is to find a way to give not only your treasure, but to give your time, to give your talent, and your treasure. You know, and I know that Irene has great things coming and great things in the works. You know, and I really feel blessed to have been able to see the men who came up here before me tonight and spoke and shared from their heart, because it is hard. You know, this isn't just like a business mentorship thing where we get up and we just talk about money, you know, and it's all fun, and then we can just wear fancy clothes and stuff. Like, this is pouring out your heart. And for each and every one of those men that came up here and did that, it's an amazing thing. And that's giving your time and your talents as well. But that brings us to the heart of what we're here for tonight, right? We're here to support Cornerstone. We're here to support their mission. We're here to support their mobile ultrasound machine. We're here to support their abortion healing services, the abortion pill reversal. Over 8,000, this just came out last month, we're up to 8,000 successful abortion pill reversals in this country. And I think what's important about that is that last year at this time, we were only at 5,000. Like, it's becoming more well-known, and it's becoming more well-known even though they're fighting against it. You know, they don't want people to know about it. Their states, the state of Colorado just lost a lawsuit against a pregnancy center where they were trying to shut down their ability to provide abortion pill reversal. Some states are saying you can't even talk about it. Yeah, like they don't want people to know. I mean, I know it's all about choice, right? Unless you make the choice not to kill your baby. And so they don't even want people to know. So the services that are being provided by Cornerstone Medical Services are incredibly important, and we're in a rural community, you know. So the ability to go, like Irene said, to Walmart, you know, the ability to post up in front of Planned Parenthood, that's exciting. That should excite every single one of you, because those people that are walking in there, you know, to be able to look up and see, wait a minute, there's other options. Where the people that are outside of Planned Parenthood are telling them, no, there's no other options, but they can see it with their own eyes. So all the support that you bring tonight is going to help that to happen. And I just ask that everybody prayerfully consider, you know, what you can do to give to support Cornerstone Medical Services, and then prayerfully consider giving more. Because this is an important thing. Abortion is the fight of our lifetime. And if we do our jobs today, then it does not have to be the fight of my son's lifetime or Irene's granddaughter's lifetime. And I think that's what's important, is that we need to end this now. And we end it in so many different ways. There's so many different fights going on. You know, I met Andrew tonight, who's doing sidewalk counseling, which is an amazing part of this fight, you know, and we have to serve the women too. And if we can be there when they are at the place where they are about to make the biggest mistake of their life, if Cornerstone's able to meet them there with the mobile unit, then we can save lives. And what you do tonight saves lives. So please give generously and help Cornerstone as much as you can. Thank you.